Our story of the day comes from 2 Kings, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. And again, just to point out that Elijah is the mentor. He's older. He has more experience. Elijah is younger and following and learning from Elijah. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elijah were on their way from God. Elijah said to Elijah, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elijah said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elijah and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will be taken by your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know, but keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elijah, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elijah and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know, but be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 of the company of prophets also went. They stood at some distance from them, and they both were standing by the river Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to one side and to the other, until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elijah, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elijah, the protege, said, "Please, let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted to you. If not, it will not." And they continued walking and talking. A chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The congregation may be seated. One day Jesus was walking down the road, and he came across a man who was crying on the side of the road. And Jesus said, "My child, why do you cry?" And the man said, "I am blind." Well, Jesus laid his hand upon him and said, "My child, you are healed." And the man was healed. Jesus continued to walk down the road, and he came across a woman who was crying on the side of the road. And Jesus said, "My child, why do you cry?" And she was holding her stomach, and she said, "I've been sick for years." And Jesus laid his hand upon her, and the woman was healed. Jesus continued to walk down the road, came across a group of people. 9 of them were crying. And Jesus said, "My child, why do you cry?" And the 9 said, "We're the adult leaders going on the ELCA youth gathering with 33 youth." And Jesus sat down with them and cried with them. I, of course, am just kidding. You don't have to be mad at me. But in all seriousness, leading a youth trip like this is one of the most difficult and yet one of the most important things in the entire world. It's stressful, it's exhausting, physically exhausting, emotionally exhausting, spiritually exhausting. We need to stay up as late as they stay up. If they get up early, we have to get up early. Patience will be tested. Temperament will be tried. Now maybe you're thinking, aren't you being just a little bit dramatic? But the truth is, I'm not. Because the reality is, for the next 9 days, 216 hours, we will be traveling with the most precious cargo in the entire world. This, of course, is our young people. And as difficult as a trip like this is, it's worth it. Because you are worth it. It will be exhausting, but it'll also be exciting. Patience will be tested, yet the peace of God will prevail. And for our 9 adult leaders, it might mean crying on the side of the road, but we don't cry alone. We struggle together, and we struggle in the presence and the power of Christ. Now, most of you know that this summer we've been studying biblical characters every week. Chronologically, we've been moving through the Bible and talking about these characters. And this week we talk about Elijah. Now, Elijah is an interesting Old Testament character. Elijah was a prophet of God that lived about 850 years before the birth of Jesus. He was a prophet. He was a wonder worker. He stood up for the worship of God, even to a king who did not allow it. He was an example, a witness to the power of the one true God, our Creator. And Elijah exemplified this power of God in a variety of ways. And for the sake of this sermon, we're going to look at 2 of these ways. 2 specific things that we learn from the story of Elijah. First of all, we learn about the power of God in miracles. Elijah had God perform a variety of miracles, including the prophecy that there would be a famine, and there was. During the famine, God told Elijah to go to a river, and that birds, ravens, would bring him food, the story that John read, and they did. When the river went dry, God told Elijah to go to this specific widow woman and that she would give him food during this famine. Elijah did it. He went to this woman and said, I need food. God has told me to come here. But the woman said, I don't have enough food. I only have enough food for 1 meal for my son and for me. We will eat it, it'll be gone, and surely we will die. But God spoke to these people through Elijah and said, the jar of meal will not go empty, and the jug of oil will not fail. The jar did not go empty, and the jug of oil did not fail. However, the widow woman's son still died. But through Elijah, another miracle, God brings her son back to life. In another part of the story, Elijah calls upon God to send down fire, and God does it. Then in the story that I just read, Elijah and his protege, Elijah, come to the Jordan River. Elijah parts the water, and the 2 of them walk across dry ground. And then finally, this miracle of Elijah being taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, leaving Elijah to do God's work on earth. The first thing that we learn from this story is the power of God exemplified in Elijah. The second thing that we learn from Elijah is the power of mentorship. Elijah is a mentor. And we see this in a couple of different ways. First of all, we see Elijah being a mentor to Elijah. Now, Elijah is a little bit older. He has more experience. Elijah is younger, follows, listens, and learns from his mentor. And I love this line that we hear 3 different times in the story, in the gospel text for today. The commitment that Elijah has to his mentor, Elijah. Elijah says, as the Lord lives, as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And then again, we see the significance of this mentorship when Elijah asks for an inheritance from Elijah. Now, most times when people are looking for an inheritance, they're looking for money. They're looking for land or the animals or some kind of physical wealth or a material possession. But what is it that the protege asks of the mentor? Not a material possession, but your spirit. What a wonderful example of mentorship. I don't want your money. What I want is your heart for God. What I want is your faith. I want my faith to be like yours. Now, to follow Tiger Woods or Jordan Spieth or LeBron James, it's more than studying statistics. It's that I want to be like you. Now, I remember when I was in high school and a basketball player, it was Michael Jordan. And it wasn't just that we would watch Michael Jordan. We would study Michael Jordan. And then we'd go out on the basketball court and we'd try to be Michael Jordan. We'd try to do the dunks that Michael Jordan was doing. It was more than following. We wanted to be like him. And we hear that in Elijah's words, that I want my heart to be like your heart. Now, if you had some of these mentors in your life, that you look at their faith and you think, I want my faith to be like their faith. I want to learn from this person. Now, another way that the mentorship of Elijah is exemplified is in this company of prophets. Now, I, of course, have read this text many times and this story many times, and I never paid much attention to that little phrase, company of prophets, until this week. And so I dug a little deeper about what this means. And sometimes this is translated school of prophets or company of prophets. This school of prophets is a group of about 50 students who would travel and follow their mentor, who would watch and learn about God and their faith. Let's think about this. About 50 students traveling, living out their faith, to learn more about who they are, to learn a little bit more about their relationship with God. Does this sound familiar today? A few weeks ago, we were on a youth trip, and Jerry Elfson was driving the bus, and I was sitting in the front of the bus, and we were talking, and he started talking about mentors. And he said, have you had some pastors in your life that have influenced you into being a pastor? And I said, well, maybe a few. And I started talking about Pastor Moberg, who had been my supervisor when I was at First Lutheran in Bemidji. Her compassion, her care for people. She also was an interim here for about a year when I first got here. Then I started talking about Pastor Eric, my pastor from my hometown when I was in high school, who still is somebody that I stay in contact with. When I have a theological question, I'll go to for advice. And Pastor Jim, PJ, who we've had preach here on a Wednesday night before, just retired from campus ministry, again in Bemidji. I started talking about Pastor Eldon, who had been my supervisor in Alaska when I was on internship. I talked about Pastor Mark and Pastor Linnea, who had been my clinical pastoral education, clinical work pastor supervisors. I talked about Bishop Rick Foss, who had been the bishop in eastern North Dakota, who became my go-to person at Lutheran Seminary when I had a theological question asked. I talked about Bishop Terry Brandt, our bishop right now in eastern North Dakota, who has earned my respect, who I go to with questions, and I know I'm going to always get sound advice. I listed about 15 or 20 pastors who have been my mentors. But you don't have to be a pastor to be a mentor. Some of my most significant mentors have been my buddy JD, who invited me on my first youth trip, who took me on my first missions trip, who's continued to be a friend. He's become a doctor. And a lot of our youth who went on the mission trip last year to Florida, we stopped in South Carolina and stayed at his place. Some of my other mentors, my mom and dad, my brother, my wife Amanda, my buddy Roll, who is a youth director in the cities, several other good friends, people who I've gone to church with, Sunday school teacher, the list goes on. Including many of you, including 33 youth who are giving up 10 days of their lives and making a commitment to their faith. Sometimes we refer to our youth as the future of the church. The truth is, you're not. You're not the future of the church. You are the church. Baptized, called, and gathered. They're not future leaders of the church. They're leaders today. You see, God is doing something today. Not just on this trip, but in this congregation and in this community. God is calling all of us to be active in our faith, to be mentored, but also to mentor. Now, there's two criteria for you to be a mentor of a young person. The first thing is, do you love the Lord? The second thing is, do you love youth? If you answer yes to both of those questions, you are a mentor to our young people. It's not about being cool, having the right thing to say, or being able to play a musical instrument, or even having a clue of the music that they listen to. It's simply about caring about them. To ask them, how are you doing? How is your day going? I watched you in basketball, or I watched you in football, or in cross country, or in music, or arts, dance, or drama. We learn about the power of God that is exemplified in Elijah. We also learn about the power of God that's exemplified in you. For the next 9 days, we ask for your prayers. And in 2 weeks, we'll be back, and this same group is going to be up front presenting and sharing our experience from this trip. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your mentorship. May the power of Christ be alive in all of us. May the power of the Holy Spirit keep us safe. And may the jar of God's blessing never go empty. To God be the glory, now and forever. Amen.